What did Michael do to Lucifer that heaven was never meant to see? When the light-bearer rose in defiance, the response was not chaos, and it was not mercy. It was something far more unsettling. Michael did not strike in rage. He moved under authority that was not his own. What followed was not merely a battle, but a divine procedure, precise and irreversible. The fall of Lucifer was not thunderous. It was swift, surgical, and the act that sealed it was hidden from mortal sight for a reason. Because if humanity truly understood what was done in that moment, it would forever reshape how we see judgment, obedience, and the terrifying order of heaven itself. If you believe God's justice holds mysteries beyond human reason, like and subscribe so you do not miss what He reveals through His Word. The rebellion had begun in silence, not with weapons drawn or declarations shouted through the courts of heaven, but with a thought. A hidden desire nestled in the heart of a cherub once adorned with fire and light. Lucifer, once the seal of perfection, had allowed his reflection of glory to become a mirror of ambition. But heaven did not panic. It did not fracture or fall into disorder. There was no scrambling of angelic hosts, no rush of chaos across the sea of glass. Instead, heaven stood still. Still as eternity. Still as the throne that had never been moved. The moment Lucifer's heart turned, the throne did not need to deliberate. There was no trial, no heavenly debate, no weighing of arguments. The rebellion had already broken the invisible order, and the order itself now responded. And that response came in the form of one being. His name was not whispered, but declared across dimensions. Michael, who is like God. Not a question, but a reminder. A name that answers pride with reverence. He did not rise in emotion. He did not draw his sword in anger. Michael moved as one moved by the breath of God Himself. Not as an aggressor defending heaven's reputation, but as the embodiment of divine will. His mission was not conquest, it was correction. Lucifer's rebellion was not a threat to God. It was an impossibility. Nothing could rise above what has no height. Nothing could ascend beyond what has no top. The Most High is not one among many. He is the category beyond categories. And so Michael did not approach the rebel as an equal meeting equal. He came as authority answering trespass. Heaven's order was never arbitrary. It was born of love, carved in light and sealed in fire. And when it was violated, it did not panic. It acted. Michael stepped forward, and with him moved a host not of rage, but of response. A celestial host, whose eyes did not burn with vengeance, but with clarity. They moved because God had spoken, not aloud, not through thunder or smoke, but through the motion of justice itself. Lucifer, the light bearer, had fallen inward before he fell downward. And now, the consequence of that collapse had arrived. But here, in this very moment, we pause, not because the story has finished, but because what is about to be unveiled was never meant for the eyes of mortals. And yet you are here. If this revelation has begun to stir your spirit, we invite you to help us continue unveiling these mysteries. Like, comment, and share this message. Subscribe to this channel, and, if you feel led, bless the ministry through a super thanks or become a member. Every act of support fuels deeper research and helps carry these messages to those longing for truth. Now let us return to the scene where heaven did not tremble, but stood in its full glory, prepared to act. The motion was swift. Michael did not hesitate. There was no dialogue, no confrontation as mortals imagine it. What happened next was not an argument between two powers. It was the execution of a decree written before time. Lucifer stood amidst the stones of fire, a being of unmatched beauty, still cloaked in the remnants of his original splendor. But that beauty had already begun to dim, for the light he once reflected now met resistance from within. Michael approached, not with a sword drawn in haste, but with authority that preceded weaponry. His power was not forged, it was bestowed. It wasn't claimed, it was commissioned. The angels who followed him did not question. They had no need. For in the presence of perfect order, there is no space for doubt. The law of heaven was not written on scrolls. It was embedded in being, woven into the essence of creation itself. Lucifer had not just violated a rule, he had broken alignment with existence. And so, Michael moved not to destroy, but to expel. Not to punish, but to sever. The moment was surgical, not theatrical. The throne had determined, and the hosts had obeyed. Heaven did not rage, it released. The scene is almost too clean for human comprehension. There were no screams, only silence. Not silence of indifference, but of finality. The kind of silence that falls over the void when light chooses to step away. Lucifer did not fall because Michael defeated him in battle. He fell because heaven no longer sustained his place. That was the true force that moved. Michael was simply the vessel through which divine justice flowed. The angels did not cheer. There was no celebration in the removal of glory, only solemnity, a grief that does not weep, but remembers. And as the adversary was cast out, no longer Lucifer, no longer bearer of light, but now Satan, the accuser. Heaven did not fill the space he left. It simply closed the gap with glory. There is no void in God. What was removed was not missed. And yet the memory remained, not as regret, but as a mark. A reminder to all the hosts that obedience is not limitation. It is alignment with life. The expulsion was total. No remnants of authority remained. The one who once stood near the throne now stood outside the order. And the one who expelled him, Michael, did not exalt himself. He returned, not celebrated, but silent. For what he did was not for praise, but for preservation. The mystery of what Michael did lies not only in its power, but in its purity. It was perfect justice enacted without stain, without delay, and without residue. And that is why it was never meant to be seen by mortal eyes. Because what humanity sees as victory, heaven remembers as sorrow. And what we call judgment, heaven knows as necessary separation. Still, the question remains, why Michael? Why not the throne itself? Why not the fire or the voice? What made this angel the chosen hand? The answer lies not in Michael's strength, but in his name. And that is the revelation we now pursue. Michael was not the mightiest by strength, nor the brightest by appearance, nor the most eloquent among the heavenly beings. He did not sing like the seraphim, whose voices shook the pillars of heaven with holy fire. He did not shine like Lucifer once did, adorned in stones of glory and garments of light. He did not carry the scrolls of mystery like Uriel, nor the balm of healing like Raphael, nor even the words of promise like Gabriel. And yet, when the rebellion erupted in silence, when the first fracture marred the perfect rhythm of eternity, it was not those messengers or musicians or healers who were summoned. It was Michael. Not because he was greater, but because he was aligned. Michael's name is not a title. It is a question, a rebuke, and a banner all at once. Who is like God? It is the eternal counter to pride. Where Lucifer said, "I will ascend," Michael's very existence answered, "None but God." That is the secret of his authority. He never sought it. He never claimed position. His power did not come from desire. It came from surrender. In heaven, authority is not seized. It is reflected. The closer one stands to the will of God, the more one becomes its vessel. And among the celestial hierarchy, Michael stood closest in submission. He was the pattern of obedience, not robotic compliance, but willing alignment. Every motion of his wings, every beat of his heart, pulsed with the rhythm of divine order. He was not brilliant like the dawn, but steady like the throne. Not creative in design, but faithful in decree. And that faithfulness became power when faith was broken. The heavenly hosts are ranked not by popularity, beauty, or force, but by purpose and purity. Thrones, dominions, principalities, powers. Each order exists to express a dimension of divine rule. But Michael's role was not merely administrative. He was one of the chief princes, a warrior among worshippers, an instrument of intervention. His sword was not ornamental. It was forged in eternal assignment. And though Scripture gives us only glimpses, his defense of Israel, his fight for Moses' body, his leadership in the war of revelation, those glimpses reveal a being trusted with thresholds. Michael stands at the borders of rebellion, not to argue, but to draw the line. He is not the light, but the guardrail that protects it. He is not the flame, but the blade that keeps the altar pure. When Lucifer's heart turned inward, when the covering cherub sought to be covered in worship, it was Michael who rose, not against Lucifer's power, but against his presumption. For in Michael, heaven declared that no matter how glorious the creation, it will never rival the Creator. Lucifer had been close to the throne, but he had begun to reflect on his own reflection. Pride inverted him. Worship was no longer a stream that passed through him to God. It pooled around him and stagnated into self-glory. In that moment, heaven needed a response. Not a rival to contest the rebel's might, but a servant who embodied the opposite spirit. That is why Michael was chosen. He did not act as himself, but as a conduit of heaven's verdict. He was the voice of another, the sound of divine finality through an obedient vessel. His sword had no hatred, only holiness. His motion bore no ego, only edict. It was not a personal vendetta, for Michael had nothing to avenge. It was a divine severing, and Michael was the hand. And in that act, all of heaven saw the pattern established for eternity. Power without submission leads to exile. Humility with obedience becomes dominion. Even the fallen know this, for they fear Michael not because he shines with terrifying brightness, but because he carries a name that cannot be challenged. Who is like God? The adversary still has power. He still moves among the nations, deceives, manipulates, even accuses. But what he cannot do is answer that name. He cannot say, "I am like God," without lying. Michael's presence is the proof that heaven remembers the fall, not as defeat, but as a boundary, a line that cannot be crossed. That is why Revelation presents him not as the last defense, but as the first movement of divine war. He initiates, he acts. Because judgment in heaven does not react in fear, it responds in fullness. And Michael's sword is not a threat, it is a memory, a reminder of what happens when worship turns into ambition. And it is no accident that Michael is called the Great Prince who stands for your people in the book of Daniel. For he who defended heaven's order is also the one assigned to preserve God's covenant people. What began as the severing of rebellion became the shield of redemption. Michael's role did not end with Lucifer's fall, it expanded. The same sword that cast out the proud is now drawn against the accuser of the brethren. And though he speaks little in Scripture, his silence is louder than any sermon. He does not need to defend his position. His obedience is his identity. His strength lies in his surrender. And in that paradox, the mystery deepens. For the true power in heaven does not boast, it bows. And the angels who shine brightest are not those who ascend highest, but those who remain closest to the will that made them. Michael is that nearness, personified. Not as a friend of the throne, but as its instrument. And that is why, when the greatest rebellion in the history of the cosmos unfolded, God didn't send the fire, or the flood, or even his own voice. He sent Michael, not to defeat an enemy, but to enact a verdict. And in that moment, the cosmos watched and remembered. No created glory, no matter how radiant, will ever eclipse the one from whom all glory flows. It did not happen as men might imagine it, with lightning bolts or the clamor of battle. There was no celestial clash of titans, no cinematic display of heavenly violence. The fall of Lucifer was not a fight. It was a decree, a severing of access so exact, so absolute, that it shattered glory without destroying the vessel that once held it. He who once walked among the stones of fire, the innermost regions of heaven, the closest realm to the throne itself, was removed, not by struggle, but by a withdrawal of permission. The stones of fire were not merely a place, they were a privilege. They marked a proximity not shared by all angelic beings, a nearness reserved only for those who reflected the holiness of the Most High without distortion. To walk among them was to exist in alignment with the throne's radiance. Lucifer had once done so. He had not only walked there, he had belonged there. He had moved with a grace that reflected heaven's majesty, clothed in worship, robed in the beauty of divine design. Every gemstone upon him had been placed with intention. Sardius, topaz, diamond, beryl, onyx, jasper, sapphire, emerald, carbuncle. Each one a mirror of the Creator's own glory, refracted through creation. His timbrels and flutes, prepared on the day of his creation, meant he was not only a bearer of light, but a vessel of harmony. The music of heaven once passed through him, like rivers through a crystal. But music, without submission, becomes noise. And light, when turned inward, becomes shadow. Lucifer's desire did not erupt in a moment. It unfolded like a silent storm within. Scripture says, "You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created, until iniquity was found in you." That word, found, is the heartbeat of the moment. It was not inflicted upon him, nor inherited. It was uncovered, unveiled, exposed by the perfect radiance of God's presence, like a crack in a mirror made visible by sudden light. And heaven, which tolerates no shadow near its core, responded, not with reaction, but with righteousness. The decision had already been made in the eternity of God's knowing. It was simply now being enacted. And so, without drama, without spectacle, the throne withdrew its sanction. The fire no longer sustained him. The proximity no longer welcomed him. His place among the cherubim dissolved, and what had once been his covering, glory, beauty, nearness, became the very weight that cast him down. Lucifer fell, not because he was overpowered, but because he was uncovered. The light that he once bore now revealed the darkness within him, and in that moment, all that was borrowed, radiance, authority, access, was revoked. The fall was not downward in direction, it was downward in relation. He was removed from rank, from role, from realm. And yet he did not cease to exist. That is the terror of his condition. Lucifer was not annihilated. He was preserved, but altered. He became Satan, not because his being changed, but because his position did. He retained memory, intelligence, influence, but without anchoring to the throne. He became a spirit out of orbit, a being of power without purpose, beauty without truth, authority without alignment. This is why Scripture speaks of the place no longer found for him in heaven. not because he was chased out, but because his essence had become incompatible with the order of glory. The stones of fire did not reject him. They simply no longer recognized him. And what had once welcomed him now seared. Michael did not need to strike him down. The throne itself had already withdrawn his standing. Michael's movement was not removal. It was reinforcement. The sentence had been spoken in silence, and Michael carried it like fire in his wings. And so Lucifer became the fallen one. Not because he tripped, but because he could no longer stand where only surrender can stand. His descent was not into death, but into distance, from the center of light to the edge of rebellion. He was now the accuser, the adversary, the ancient serpent, not because he had been renamed, but because he had unmade his own name. Lightbearer became tempter. Guardian became enemy. His fall was not a collapse of being, but a collapse of belonging. And the memory of it lingers in heaven not as a wound, but as a testimony. Angels still remember. They do not speak of it often, for there are things in heaven that are known but not spoken. But they remember what it was like to see one of their own lose place, to see proximity turn to exile, to witness the cost of self-will near the fire of God. And in that memory, reverence is renewed. Not fear of punishment, but awe of holiness. For the fall of Lucifer was not proof of God's wrath. It was proof of his perfection. Heaven did not punish rebellion to preserve power. Heaven expelled it to preserve purity. For no throne can be defiled and still remain the throne. Lucifer's removal was the preservation of heaven's harmony, the sealing of the sacred order. And in this truth lies the clearest revelation of divine justice. It is not reactionary, it is resolute. Not impulsive, but inviolable. Not arbitrary, but absolute. Lucifer's fall was precise. It fit the infraction with terrifying symmetry. He who desired to ascend above the stars was cast beyond their reach. He who wished to sit upon the mount of the congregation was removed from the mountain entirely. He who claimed equality with the Most High now roams beneath the heavens, seeking whom he may devour. And yet he still exists. That is the haunting mystery. Judgment did not erase him. It exposed him. And exposure is a different kind of torment. To be what he is, knowing what he was. To remember Eden not as a garden, but as a gate that is forever shut. To hear the songs of heaven not as invitation, but as indictment. This is the justice of heaven, not the destruction of the rebel, but the stripping of his access. For what makes heaven, heaven is not beauty, or power, or music. It is alignment with the will of God. And that alignment, once broken, cannot be faked. Lucifer tried, but even beauty cannot hide rebellion before the eyes of fire. The throne sees, the fire discerns, and when iniquity was found in him, the stones no longer carried him, and thus he fell, quietly, totally, forever. Heaven, though eternal, had never known fracture until that day. And when the fracture came, it did not shatter the throne, but it echoed through every rank, every realm, every being in the spiritual dimension. The fall of Lucifer was not just the removal of one. He was not a solitary note gone flat. He had been a chord, a harmony interwoven with the worship of heaven. And when he was cast out, the vibration of that loss passed through all the angelic hosts. But the silence that followed was not the silence of uncertainty. It was reverence, awe, and understanding. What they saw was not wrath, but law. Not emotional retaliation, but divine realignment. Heaven did not mourn with confusion. It stood in clarity. For in the removal of Lucifer, the faithful angels learned the boundary of their freedom and the depth of God's perfection. Until then, loyalty had been like air, breathed without question, moved in without weight. Now, it was a choice seen anew, not because they doubted, but because they had witnessed what choice, when turned inward, became. The spiritual realm did not recoil in terror, it steadied in truth. The event became a holy scar on the memory of eternity, a fixed point that defined the limits of will, not to bind the angels, but to protect the harmony. They saw that God's love was not permissive, it was precise. His glory was not casual, it was consecrated. And his will was not an option, it was the structure of existence itself. The angels had always known that they were created, but now they understood that even their beauty, their strength, their place was sustained by alignment. Not enforced obedience, but chosen agreement. Heaven does not operate by chains. It flows in response to the throne. And the throne does not sway with mood. It moves with eternal constancy. Lucifer had attempted to introduce variance where there was only virtue, to weave self-glory into the tapestry of surrender. And now, his absence told the tale. He was not destroyed, he was distanced, and that distance thundered through heaven with more weight than any fire could carry. Because the punishment was not suffering, it was disconnection. To be outside the order is to be outside of existence's center. The angels saw it. They felt it, not as loss, but as revelation. They learned that freedom is not the right to rebel. It is the power to remain aligned. Rebellion is not strength, it is separation. And no power can exist apart from the source without decaying into shadow. The seraphim, closest to the throne, covered their faces not in fear of falling, but in reverence for the one who does not. Their wings burned not only with worship, but now with understanding. What they had sung eternally, holy, 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 now held a sharper edge. Not all who beheld the glory had loved it. Not all who bore the light had kept it. And so their song deepened, not in volume, but in weight. The cherubim, guardians of presence, did not flinch when Lucifer fell. They knew their task was not to keep God safe, but to keep access sacred. And now, that sacredness had been confirmed. The flames of the sword that guarded Eden would later burn, not just as a boundary, but as a testimony. Heaven would not negotiate with corruption. It would not coddle rebellion. It'd separate. And that separation became the fear of those who remained. Not fear of punishment, but fear of losing proximity. Heaven is not maintained by force. It is preserved by holiness. And that holiness was never more visible than in what it expelled. The archangels who watched Michael move understood that his authority was not his own. They saw that to carry God's will is to carry fire without being consumed. They had witnessed the power of the Most High rest on a servant, not because he was mighty, but because he was surrendered. And that knowledge spread like fire through the angelic realms. It became a new kind of song, not of melody, but of memory. A silent chorus that repeated with every wing that moved in alignment. This is what happens when pride forgets its place. The heavenly ranks were not rearranged after the fall. They were reinforced. What had always been true was now known. There was no revolt among the faithful, not even a whisper, no curiosity, no echo of Lucifer's delusion. Because heaven does not learn by suggestion, it learns by vision. And they had seen. What began as a single thought in a single heart became the clearest sermon ever preached to a realm that had never needed preaching. There was no debate, no trial, no long process. The angels now understood that justice in heaven is not a consequence, it is a consistency. It does not wait for rebellion to bloom, it ends it at the root. But even in that, they saw mercy. For God did not erase the fallen, He marked them. He allowed them to remain, not in heaven, but in the margins of the story. And even that was revelation. The angel saw that God does not need to prove himself by obliteration. His glory is not fragile. His throne is not insecure. He does not rage. He rules. And in that rule, even rebellion becomes a tool. For the story was not over. The fall was a beginning, not an end. It was the first ripple in a plan that would one day stretch to earth, to dust, to flesh, to a cross. The angels did not know the full picture, but they knew the throne wasn't shaken. And that was enough. The boundaries had been marked. The lesson was imprinted in eternity. And the loyalty of heaven was no longer passive, it was defined. No angel would forget. Not because they feared punishment, but because they had seen the price of pride. And from that moment forward, every motion in heaven carried weight. Every choice was clearer. Every wing beat echoed not just with worship, but with wisdom. They did not tremble because they were threatened. They stood firm because they had seen. And what they had seen was not just the fall of one, it was the rise of understanding. That the throne of God is not merely the center of power, it is the source of all order. And to step out of it is not to rebel, it is to fall out of reality itself. That is what Lucifer did. And that is what heaven will never allow again. From the beginning, heaven had no intention of hiding the truth from creation. But some truths, when revealed too soon or too raw, do more harm than good. The fall of Lucifer, its swiftness, its severity, its silence, was not erased from the human record because it lacked relevance, but because without the covering of mercy, its terror would eclipse the tenderness of God. Humanity, bound in time and veiled by flesh, could not yet understand the paradox of divine judgment and divine love coexisting without conflict. To reveal what Michael did to Lucifer in its full spiritual weight, without the revelation of the cross, would not inspire reverence, but despair. For how could a fragile creature of dust and willful failure hope to stand before a throne that expelled a being as exalted as Lucifer? How could man comprehend justice that moves without counsel, that speaks without explanation, that severs without struggle? If the veil were torn too early, the sight would destroy faith before it could form. And so, in divine patience, heaven concealed the moment, not as deception, but as protection. The prophets glimpsed the shadow of it. Isaiah spoke of the fallen star, Ezekiel of the guardian cherub cast down. But the full vision, the soundless precision, the eternal finality, was withheld. Not because it was unworthy, but because it was too holy to be understood, apart from the Lamb. This is the mercy of concealment, that God does not display power in isolation, but always in the context of his purposes. And his purpose was never just judgment, it was always redemption. The throne that cast out Lucifer was the same throne that, in time, would receive the blood of Christ. And that blood would speak better things than vengeance. But humanity, still in its infancy, still wrestling with sin, still fragile in its perception of God, would have misinterpreted Michael's act. They would have seen a vengeful deity, a God who strikes without hesitation, a judge who leaves no room for appeal. They would not have seen the love behind the law, the mercy behind the separation, the perfection behind the silence. For what Michael enacted was not wrath, it was the defense of glory. But how can that be seen by those who have not yet tasted grace? The story had to unfold. The veil had to remain until the right time, until Christ. Only then could heaven begin to unveil what it had hidden. Only then could the severity of judgment be revealed alongside the unimaginable depth of mercy. The severity was real, but it was not the whole story. And so, to protect the narrative of salvation, the full picture was kept sealed. Even the disciples, though walking with the living Word, were not told everything. Jesus hinted at the fall. "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." But even then, his focus was not on the event itself, but on the authority he was giving to his followers. For now, it was not the time to expose the mechanics of judgment. It was the time to introduce the miracle of grace. The early church would later wrestle with these mysteries. John, on the Isle of Patmos, would receive visions. Paul would speak of spiritual powers and authorities. Jude would reference Michael contending with the devil. But none of them attempted to fully reveal what happened when the light bearer was cast out. They could not. The Spirit had not yet lifted the veil entirely. And perhaps that is why even today, the moment remains largely undiscussed, even among believers. It is not absent, but it is unapproachable, like a mountain wreathed in smoke. And that is no accident. Heaven reveals according to readiness. What Michael did to Lucifer was not an episode. It was a pillar in the architecture of eternity. And to see it without first seeing the cross is to misunderstand both. For judgment without Jesus is terror. But judgment with Jesus becomes purification, becomes hope, becomes the fire that refines, rather than the fire that consumes. This is why God veiled the moment. And this is why, even now, the revelation comes slowly, layer by layer, spirit upon spirit, line upon line. Because when God uncovers what he once hid, it is not to overwhelm, it is to awaken. And if you have come this far in the mystery, if the unveiling is stirring something deeper in your soul, then we invite you to journey further. Before we continue, if this content has blessed your life, like, comment, and share. Subscribe to the channel, and if you would like to bless this ministry, click the Super Thanks button and leave an offering of any amount or become a member. That way, we can continue investing in research and improvements to bless your life even more. Now, let us return to the mystery that was hidden, not to be buried, but to be revealed at the right time. The moment when Lucifer fell was not the end of rebellion. It was the marking of its limit. And even in hiding that moment from humanity, heaven was not concealing wrath. It was preparing the path for something greater. For just as Michael removed the rebel, another would one day descend to remove the curse. And what was enforced in heaven would be fulfilled on earth, not with a sword, but with a cross. The ripple of Michael's sword did not end at the threshold of heaven. It stretched, unseen but unstoppable, into the very fabric of human history. What was severed above would echo below, not in the language of angels, but in the long, winding dialect of dust, choice, and blood. When Lucifer fell, he did not fall into oblivion. He fell into Earth's orbit, not as a ruler, but as a usurper. Not as a king, but as a whispering shadow in the garden of God's new creation. Eden did not come before the fall of Lucifer. It came in its aftermath. And in that lush garden, where rivers flowed and glory walked in the cool of the day, the consequences of heaven's judgment began to take on flesh. The very same being who had once stood among the stones of fire now slithered among the trees of innocence. He could not undo what Michael had enforced, but he could seek vengeance through corruption. If he could not ascend back to glory, perhaps he could drag glory's image down into ruin. And so, the great deceiver set his eyes on the dust-born children of God, whose very breath still carried the echo of divine intimacy. The temptation in Eden was not merely about fruit, it was about allegiance. It was a reenactment, an echo of Lucifer's original lie. You shall be like God. It was the same rebellion repackaged in softer language. And when the man and woman reached for that forbidden likeness, they did not just break a command, they aligned with the memory of heaven's first revolt. The serpent's exile became humanity's. And in that moment, what Michael had executed in heaven now manifested on earth. Separation, distance. The sword that once marked the edge of glory now guarded the edge of Eden. The cherubim were stationed, flaming sword turning every direction, not to punish, but to protect. Not to destroy man, but to prevent him from sealing his ruin by touching the tree of life in his fallen state. And the silence of the garden echoed with a truth as old as eternity. Proximity to God is always governed by alignment. But even here, as man stumbled in the long shadow of Lucifer's curse, another shadow had already been cast. A shadow shaped like a cross. For what Michael enforced by command, Christ would one day resolve by compassion. The sword of judgment would be answered by the wound of mercy. The expelled would be invited. The cut would be healed. Yet the law of holiness would not be erased. It would be fulfilled. Because divine justice does not change between heaven and earth. It only takes on form. Michael represented that justice in flame. Christ bore it in flesh. The two were not opposed, they were coordinated. Michael's act wasn't canceled at the cross, it was completed. The barrier he enforced was not cruelty, it was preparation. Without separation, there can be no redemption. Without exile, no return. And so the drama of salvation unfolded beneath the long shadow of that first celestial act. Cain would rise against Abul, echoing Lucifer's violence. Nations would rebel. Towers would rise. Golden calves would dance. And through it all, the voice behind Michael's sword would speak through prophets, priests, and kings. Return. Repent. Be holy. For I am holy. Yet none could fully restore what was lost. The veil remained. The distance endured. Until the fullness of time. Until the Word became flesh. And now, what the angels longed to look into began to take shape. The second Adam stepped into the dust, not with the pride of Lucifer, but with the obedience of Michael. Not my will, but yours be done. In that one sentence, Jesus realigned what humanity had severed. He bore not only man's sin, but the spiritual weight of heaven's justice. On the cross, Christ did not merely suffer, he satisfied. The sword of Eden was not removed. It was sheathed in his side. He was pierced, not because God changed his standard, but because he met it himself. The exile ended, not by erasing the law, but by embodying it. And in that moment, the shadow of Michael's sword became the backdrop for the greatest act of love ever known. The expulsion of Lucifer had proven that rebellion cannot remain in the presence of God. The crucifixion of Christ proved that sinners can, if they come clothed in the righteousness of the Lamb. The justice of heaven and the mercy of earth were never enemies. They were two sides of the same flame. One guards the throne, the other opens the way. And now, through the blood of Jesus, what Michael once defended is no longer forbidden. It is accessible, not cheaply, not casually, but truly. The veil is torn. The fire still burns, but it no longer consumes. It cleanses. And the angels, those who once watched Michael move with sword in hand, now behold the Lamb upon the throne, bearing scars instead of weapons. Yet even now, the memory of the fall remains. Satan still roams, seeking to deceive, accuse, devour. But he does so under limitation, for he no longer has access to the stones of fire. He cannot ascend. He has already fallen. And now, the saints who overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony participate in that same judgment. What Michael started, the church now continues. not with violence, but with victory. Not with swords, but with truth. And one day soon, the final act will come. The dragon will be bound, the fire will consume, and Michael, perhaps, will rise once more, not to expel, but to witness the final fulfillment of the justice he once carried. What began with a fall will end in restoration, and every echo of rebellion will be silenced, not by force, but by glory, not by exile, but by Emmanuel, God with us, forever. What Michael did was never meant to be the end of a story, but the beginning of a line, drawn not with ink or stone, but with fire. A boundary that split eternity with precision, not to divide glory from creation, but to prepare the way for something far greater than judgment. His sword was not the conclusion of rebellion, but the marking of its limit. It was the first act in a divine sequence, not of revenge, but of restoration. For in that act, when the first of all rebels was cast out from the presence of God, the universe was not made darker, it was made clearer. The difference between created light and uncreated glory was exposed, and that clarity became the stage upon which all of redemptive history would unfold. From that moment onward, every law given, every altar built, every prophet sent, every exile endured, and every drop of blood shed in sacrifice pointed back to that first flame and forward to a cross. Michael's sword, unsheathed at the beginning, never returned to its scabbard in forgetfulness. It remained, suspended in divine memory, burning through time, as the sign that rebellion cannot remain where God reigns. Yet neither can distance remain where love moves. And that is the mystery too immense for human wisdom and too holy for angelic speculation. That judgment and love were never in conflict. They are not competing attributes within God. They are harmonious expressions of His perfection. Heaven's justice is not cruel, it is corrective. God's wrath is not a flaw in His character. It is the expression of His unwavering holiness. And His love is not a sentimental override of justice. It is justice fulfilled through mercy. What Michael did by force, Christ completed by blood. What began with exile found its answer in embrace. But embrace never erases the boundary. Grace does not make sin acceptable, it makes restoration possible. The line that was drawn by Michael's sword remains, not to threaten, but to illuminate. It is a line that runs through every human heart, demanding choice, demanding surrender. The same law that cast out the proud now welcomes the broken. The same presence that once consumed now comforts. But the terms have not changed. Holiness hasn't shifted. The throne hasn't lowered itself. Instead, a lamb rose to carry us up. That is the shape of the story. From expulsion to invitation. From the guard at Eden to the open tomb in a garden. The line remains. The order endures. But the path through the fire now bears the footprints of mercy. Michael, even now, stands not as a forgotten figure in some celestial archive, but as a witness that God's justice still watches. He's not a rival to the enemy, nor a symbol of vengeance. He's a marker of divine reality, that there is no freedom outside of obedience, no proximity without purity, no power without surrender. His name still answers every proud heart that whispers, "I will ascend." Who is like God? No one. Not you. Not me. Not Lucifer. And in that confession begins the journey back. For if rebellion drew the line, humility crosses it. And if exile was the beginning, home is now the ending. The act of Michael was hidden, not because it was dark, but because it was incomplete. To see it without seeing Christ is to fear the sword without knowing the shepherd. But now the veil is torn, the blood has been spilled, and the sword stands only as a signpost, not a sentence. the story is not over. The line still calls. The throne still reigns. And judgment is no longer the threat behind us, but the glory before us. For those who come through the Lamb, the fire does not destroy. It refines. And the line once drawn in separation becomes a path lit with grace. Heaven's order remains. It is terrifying. It is perfect. And it is good.